Hi, it's Karen, and I'm back for another moment in theory. Excited as always to talk about how music works. Today, I wanted to talk to you about the amount of different elements you have to learn for the 4-part harmony at grade 9 and pull it together into one sheet. Now, that is a lot of information for one sheet, so you're going to find I'm doing this video in two sections. The first two lines will be section 1, and the second two lines will be section 2. If things are going along really, really well and you don't think you need my help for section 2, you go ahead and do it without anybody telling you which notes to do. But if you feel like you need a little bit of guidance on where to put your dots on those lines and spaces, I'm here to help. So at this point, make sure that you've gone below and you've printed out this version of my theory review for grade 9. So we are going to begin with our D major example, and we discover that we have the challenge of having two seventh chords in root position in a row. How this works is that if they're both in root position, one will be complete and one will be incomplete. The question then is, does it matter which one? There are times that it doesn't at all, and there are other times it does. In this case, because the dominant seventh is moving to a 6th chord, that progression works best from a complete dominant seventh. Thus, we're going to make our 2-7 incomplete. So let's write in the 1 chord. I'm going to put an A on line 5 tenor, an F sharp on space 1 alto, and a D on line 4. So my chord looks like this, and I then come up and I put my root quality symbol on because it says for line 1 that we are supposed to have those root quality symbols in place. Now let's go on to the next chord. Now what many students do is they just go, oh good, it's the same chord, I can just put down the same letters. The 1 chord really should not have the 3rd doubled. Occasionally it happens if you're painted into a corner. There is no corner in sight here. For your D, we are going to keep it a common tone. For your A, you're going to keep it a common tone, and then you're just going to leave the other one blank for a moment. Why? Because we need to know where we're going in order to know which one is best to put in. So in our 2-7, we have written under that INC for incomplete. So that means that in EG, BD, we are going to take out the B because we omit the 5th at the root position 7th chord and double the root, which means 2 E's. Now, when I compare this to the chord before, we first say common tones. So my D goes up in the soprano. Now, I need to put a G somewhere and an E somewhere. Now, G is one away from F and one away from A, so it doesn't matter which place it's going to. The E is closer to the F sharp, so let's put that in the alto. And that would mean the G is in the tenor. Now we go back to our 1 in first inversion and say we should double the root if we can, and if not, doubling the 5th is fine too. In this case, if we double the root, we've moved by a 3rd to that note, and we move away by step, and we've got good voice leading. But we have to stop before we go any farther, and we need to actually put in our markings for our octaves and fifths to ensure that we haven't got ourselves into trouble. So in our first chord, the octave is from the bass to the soprano. In the second chord, the octave is the alto to the soprano. No parallels. And in the third chord, it is the bass to the alto. So our octaves are all in good shape, but we do need to check our fifths. So back in the first chord, D to A is a perfect 5th. Well, in the second chord, we don't actually have any 5ths to mark because the D is above the A and we do not mark the 4ths. And in our 2-7 chord, we don't have a 5th to mark because we took out the 5th when we made that chord incomplete. So we are now ready to finish putting on our root quality symbols. Chord 2 is still D, but it's over F sharp. And chord 3 is capital E, little m, 7 for an E minor 7. And here we go. This is how we are at this point. Now we can go on. 5-7, we said this was going to be complete. So A, C, E, G. We have a G common tone. We have an E common tone. And that means our C sharp is popped up into the soprano, and that's ultimate smoothness because 2 of our top 3 voices stay the same. And then our root quality is A7. So it's important to understand that our 2 chord is a minor triad with a minor 7. That means the entire part of the chord that can be labeled as major or minor is all minor. So we call it capital E, little m, 7. Our dominant 7th here is an A7. And if we think about a dominant 7th, it is a major triad on bottom with a minor 7th on the outside. So it's only the dominant 7th that you can just put a letter and a 7. Everybody else needs to be qualified as being major, minor, diminished, half diminished. All of those are options for our 7th chords. So be aware when you write those down that sometimes we have extra letters and sometimes we don't. Connect the dots between your Roman numbers and your root quality symbols. In your 2-7, the 2 was small. That means you're going to put a minor up there. And in your 5-7, the 5 was a capital. So we did not put a minor up there. Now we're going to go on to the 6th chord. With the 6th chord, we always remember when 6 follows 5, double the 3rd because it's the tonic of the key. So here we go. We need to have our leading tone rise to the tonic. That's your D. We need to have our 7th fall a 2nd. That's your F sharp. And now we put in another D. We claim this as the B minor chord, and we put in our octave and our 5th. Our dominant 7th did not have an octave to mark, but it does have a 5th. And at this point, if you need to freeze the video, this is the time to do it. This is how we look. Now let's go on to the next example, which is in B minor. I carried the key signature from the beginning of the line through each so that you would have the experience of doing an equal amount of time in the major and the minor. So we are going to start with the 1 chord of B minor, and let's just put a B in the tenor, an F sharp on space 1, a D on line 4, and we'll put our root quality symbol on immediately, capital B, little m. We mark our octave, and then because both notes of the octave are lower than the 5th, there is 2/5 to think about. So over here, there was only one of those D's was below the A, so there was 1/5. And in here, neither of the D's was below the A, so there was no 5ths to mark. When we go on from our 1 to our 6th chord, let's see if we've got any common tones. G, B, D. The B will be a common tone. The D will be a common tone. We pop our G into the one last spot with our alto, and we claim this as the G chord. And freeze, let's mark our octaves and 5ths. The octave is between the bass and the alto. Our 5th is the bass to the soprano and the alto to the soprano. So there we go. Now, this is where some students have a really hard time. They're going, I've got fewer notes than I've got chords for. And some people actually put in a bass note here. There is no bass note to put in at this point because that G is still the correct note. Leave that as your bass note. Our 4 chord is E, G, B. So we're going to look in here and say a G is already there. I've got a B as a common tone, and that means I don't have to redraw it. The E I'm going to be putting next to my D. And now to decide what to double, if we can double the root, that's always good. Let me see. We've got E, G, B. We can go down to the E in the alto. And now that's where our octave is. And now we have EM over G. So this is a good one to stop and just go through what I just said again. It is two chords here with the exact same bass note. We did not need to write it again. This one is GBD. This one is EGB. These two notes are held as common tones, and then these notes change to the E, the root of that 4 chord. Now don't forget to put your beams on for your 8th notes, because we don't want to have 5 counts in the soprano and alto. Now we're ready to go on to our 5, 6, 4, 5, 3. So our challenge in this guy is the cadential 6/4. We always double the bass, so our F sharp, let's put him in the alto, and we might as well right away put our octave sign in. And now we need the interval of a 6, which is a D. I'm going to put that next to my E, and an interval of a 4th, which is a B, and that continues to be a common tone. So when you've got your dashes, we have intervals. And our 6D will go down to the 5. Our 4B will go down to the A, and then we sharp him because he's the raised leading tone in a dominant, a major dominant. So if you're finding it confusing to follow what I just said about the cadential 6/4, I have a posted video on the uses of the second inversion triad that reviews all of those elements, and it will remain on the internet permanently. Now we need to go on to our 1 chord, and we notice there's a sharp and that it's a capital even though we're in a minor key. This is the Picardian third, or the tierce de Picardy, however you want to call it. And what happens is a piece that's in a minor key, sometimes they would just make the last chord a little bit more cheerful and raise the third of the note, the third of the chord, to make it a major sound. So if you ever just have an accidental as part of figures, and it seems to not be connected to any number, we always say it's a third above the bass. So in this case, the third above the bass is the note D, so the D will be sharped. So I'm going to put that in the soprano next to my C sharp. My common tone is F sharp, and my leading tone must rise to the tonic B. Now we have to say, what are we doing with our root quality symbols? So far we've got B little m for the first chord, G for the 6, EM over G for the 4 and first inversion. Now we have BM over F sharp for our 5/6/4, and then our -5/3 becomes just the F sharp, and it's major, so we don't have to put anything else there. And then our last chord, because we had the tierce de Picardy, became major in sound, so we put a B over it, and there we go. So if you need to freeze this to make sure you match, now's the time. And let's head on to the E flat major example. What we see here is I've managed to put 2 more 6/4 progressions here. So when we are using our second inversion triads, we always have to keep in mind how unstable they are, and that we only use them if we can name them. Within the music that we are doing, we are using the cadential 6/4, the passing 6/4, and the neighbor 6/4. It is important for you to know the shapes of those, and I'll refer you once more to my video on second inversion triads. So 1, 6, 5, 6, 4, 1 in E flat major is the passing 6/4. And if the bass goes G, F, E, somebody else does the exact opposite for voice exchange, E, F, G. Let's put that in the alto. So instead of drawing completely straight up and down, we are thinking across these and making sure that our shapes make sense to what we've learned. One voice stays the same. So E, G, B, B, D, F, it's going to be the B. Let's put him in the tenor. And now we want to double our tonic in our tonic chord. So we're going to have an E on space 4 in the soprano. The missing note in BDF is the D, and that D leading tone is going to go right back to the E flat. And we're now in line 2, so we do not have to put on any more root quality symbols. But I will say, if you were finding it difficult, doing an extra line or two of it is always a good idea. Now we have to go on to the 5 chord and say, what is our common tone? B, D, F. We've got a B that's a common tone. Now when we look at the note F, F is one away from E and F is one away from G, so it doesn't matter which place it goes. But the D is closest to the E, so we're putting him there. And tuck the F into the alto. Now in the neighbor 6/4, 2 voices stay the same and 2 voices change. So the note we always double in the 6/4 triad, the second inversion, is the bass. So that means it's the B. So we're going to make our tenor have a B all the way across. And as things go, in E flat major, our tenors have a delightfully boring existence, only singing the B flat. We can't get in trouble with as many things of parallels and hiddens if we just keep those things like that. Now, when we go to our 1/6/4, we need an E and a G. And to make this look like a neighbor 6/4, our D goes up to the E and then back down to the D. Our F goes up 1 to the G and back down to the F, resulting in this sound and sound. And then our last one on our list is in C minor with our 3 flats from the beginning of the line. So let's put in our first chord. Now, when you choose your first note for tenor, I recommend highly making your first tenor note higher than your highest bass note to help you have fewer things that you have to erase. So I'm not going to pick an E flat or a G. I'm going to pick a middle C as my tenor note. I just drew it as a half note, I'm not sure why. And I'm going to put G in the alto and E flat in the soprano. You'll see that I don't keep things squished together, again, to make it so that I have fewer times that I need to erase because things have gotten too close and there's nowhere to put something without a big leap. Now, what's the challenge in the C minor? We have to remember that 5/4/3 to 1/6, in the situation where it's all fitting in the bar, just like our passing 6/4 is actually, that 5/4/3 is acting like it's a 6/4 chord there. It's just in place of the 5/6/4. So this is your rising resolution where one note stays the same and everybody else goes up by 1. So that means in CEG, GBD, we need our G to stay the same. And now we just say E goes up to F. And CCEG, G, B, D, F, G, B is going to be in our tenor. And when we go on to our 1/6, before we go on to our 1/6, we must remember to put our natural on our B. We do not want to leave the chord without that. If you decide that you're going to wait till the end of the line to put on all your accidentals, one of a couple things happen. a good portion of people forget to actually go back to do it, even though they had the best of plans at the time. And the other thing that happens is some people are overzealous and they go, oh, I've got to raise all my Bs, and they go through the whole line, and suddenly we have B naturals in the E flat major section. That's not what you intended to do, but because you weren't thinking about the B natural as you did the chord, you were not quite as accurate as you would be. So put that B natural onto the tenor in C minor, have it rise to the C, so it's going to rise by 1, and the F is going to rise by 1 because it's the rising resolution, and you can see the bass looks like it's got the same shape as our passing 6/4, and this also, that note looks like a passing note as well, and this is a common tone, and these shapes match these shapes beautifully, with just one of the voices being parallel 10 instead of contrary motion. So that is a lovely progression to remember because it's very quick to write out. If you just remember, keep one note the same, everybody else goes up a second. 1 5 4 3 is going to 1 6. Now we're going to go to our 5 chord, which is GBD. And if we put a G in the alto, my B, it's actually a B natural, is nice next to the middle C again. You have two options now. You can jump down to the D, or you could make this an incomplete triad and have 3 Gs and make the top note a common tone. Is one of them better than the other? No, not really. Now, often we are trying to get you not to have very many leaps in the soprano because it's the safest thing to do. The reason this one worked is that the soprano is going down while the bass goes up. So if you have to have a leap in the soprano, do it when it can go opposite direction to the bass. Contrary motion will continue to be your friend. And you know what we've forgotten to do? We have forgotten to check for all of our octaves and fifths. It is important at this point that all of the octaves go in. So I'm just going to ask you to just freeze the video for a minute and go back to finish the B minor. And this is what mine looks like with all the fifths and octaves marked. When you go to your E flat major, your passing 6/4 is guaranteed not to have parallels if you remember all of the distances, the shapes that you're supposed to be going. It is guaranteed. Now, if I put in just my octaves here, we have what looks like parallel octaves here. And the answer to that is this is not parallel. This is stasis. In rudiments, we were all supposed to learn what was different between, yes, you guessed it, this is what we have to learn. What's contrary motion, what's similar motion, what's parallel motion, and what's stasis. Stasis, you haven't gone anywhere. If you haven't moved, you can't be parallel to something you haven't moved from. So it's actually ideal to have them sitting there the same. Parallel means everybody moves the same amount, like CC, DD. Both voices went up by a second. We are in parallel motion. That's what we're trying to avoid with our octaves and our fifths. Similar motion would be like if the bass went C up to G and the soprano went D up to E. They're both going up, but one's going by a little and one's going by a lot. So that's similar motion because up is the same, but it is not parallel because the number wasn't the same. And in oblique motion, one voice is staying the same and other voices are going up or down, so that we end up with a stasis on the bottom. So in here, when I give you this example, this is stasis. When we check our fifths, there's no fifth in our 1 and first inversion for E flat major. We have the B to the F in the tenor to the alto of the 5 chord. And when we went to 1 in root position, between the bass and the tenor. When we go on to the 5, it was between the bass and the alto and the tenor and the alto. We have no 5th in our 1-6-4, and our last one is the bass to the alto and the tenor to the alto. So our E flat major example looks like this. We are okay. So remember, we're only comparing this to this to this, as 2 chords at a time. You'll never be going to be worried about what this chord is compared to this chord over here. It's just 2 next to each other. And if we round off this session with our C minor examples, our octave as bass to tenor, we don't have an octave in the 5-4-3. Our octave in our 1 in first inversion is alto to soprano, and in our 5 chord, it's bass to alto. So our octaves, none of them are looking parallel. When we put in our 5ths, the first chord has C up to G, and it's got it 2 places, bass to alto and tenor to alto. Our 5-4-3, the G is not below the D, so we don't have a 5th. And we have 2 5ths in our 1 in first inversion again, tenor to alto and tenor to soprano. And then our 5th in our 5 chord is alto to soprano and bass to soprano. So at this point, we have half of this sheet done. We have our leading tones in the proper place, and we've reviewed a number of the different elements of the grade 9 theory.